Hi everyone, it's James here and welcome to this tutorial. We're going to be coding up a landing page based off a sketch design that I found, and we're going to be learning some interesting HTML and CSS techniques to cope with all of the different elements that are on the page. So let's take a look at the design and get coding up our landing page.
Okay, so this is the design that I found online. I'll put a link in the description below as to where you can get hold of this yourself and many other designs like it. But we're going to be taking this design in Sketch and converting it into a HTML and CSS representation. So I've been through and extracted all of the images and icons for this project already, and if you download the GitHub repository, you'll find all those assets inside of there so you can start working with them straight away. And I'm going to keep switching back to this design throughout our process just to keep track of if we're following the actual design itself. So with that in mind, let's go over to our code, and we've got literally a blank page at the moment. The project itself has got a parcel running as a server, and as you can see, I've got those image assets that I mentioned before. And also we're going to be using a specific font as well. But we'll come on to that in a second, because the first thing I actually want to do is put in a bit of structure for the page. I'm going to do that by creating the three columns that we saw on the design here. So this left one, the center one, and also this one on the right here. So let's start bootstrapping our markup by putting in a few base elements. So I'm going to put in a main tag, which will basically be just the whole page. And also I'm going to put in there another div with a class of page wrapper so that we can apply some different styling. And the first thing I'm going to do is literally create those three columns. And in this example, I'm going to label them all with specific class names, just so that we can distinguish in our CSS which one's which. And I'm going to give another one in the center of col center. And then finally, the last one is col right. And whilst we're here, I am actually going to put in a couple of additional elements into each of these div classes. And they're going to represent the actual blocks that are inside those columns, or the rows, if you will. So for example, in the first column, we've got one block here and then a second at the bottom here, and same sort of thing for the center column. So I'm going to put some div elements in that will represent each of those rows or blocks within the columns themselves so that we can put some content and also style them a bit later on. So for column left, there was two there, and I'm just going to give them specific names again. So you can see the first column is kind of like the navigation menu, so I'm just going to call that menu. And I'm going to put an additional div in there with a class of footer. So in the center column, the top block that we've got in the column is kind of like a heading, so I'm just going to give that a class of heading for that div element. And the bottom column is kind of like got a hero image with just some text in there, so I'm just going to call that hero. And finally for column right, we've got another sort of hero image at the top there, this kind of picture of the headphones, which I guess what this design's all about really. So we'll call that hero 2. And that's also got a footer section in there as well. So we'll just call that footer. And that gives us some of the basic structure for our page. But of course, we've got no styling in there at the moment, so we're still literally left with a blank page. So let's go and look at our styles. And we're going to do a bit of bootstrapping for this as well, so a bit of setup for the rest of the page. And the first thing we want to do is actually set some font families up. So I was able to find a pretty similar font for the application, which is this Gilroy Light and Gilroy Extra Bold. Which is quite handy because when we can see the ampersand here has got a very specific style. So using this font will just allow us to match that as best we can. But we need to import those into our project first. So I'm going to create a couple of font face rules. So the first one is going to be for the Gilroy Light. So Gilroy-Light. And the source of that is going to be a URL. And we should be able to find it from there within our parcel application. And we'll do a similar one for the extra bold as well. So we'll say font family, and it's Gilroy Extra Bold, all one word. And the URL for that is very similar. And there we go. And that will just allow us to use those fonts throughout the application. So a couple of other things to set up. I'm going to set a overall font size for the document. So this will enable us to use relative M's throughout our project. And also for the body, we just do a bit of resets here to remove any margin or padding, sorry. And we'll also set the font family to that Gilroy Light that we just imported. And if that font's not available, it should be because we're importing it, but if it's not, we'll do sans serif. Okay, so let's target some of the elements that we've just created. So I'm going to target the page wrapper to start off with, and just a couple of things to set up here. I'm going to set this as a flex container, and also the height, I'm going to set that to 100 viewpoint height units. And really, if this was a page where we had additional content, we probably wouldn't want to do this. But just for our tutorial today, this will just allow the content that we're going to be creating to fill this blank page that we've got here. Okay, so we'll save that, and again, nothing's happening because we haven't actually added anything in. So let's start targeting our columns. So we'll have column left and column center and column right. And because these columns are actually going to be inside of the page wrapper where we've got a flexbox, what we can actually do is specify how much of the page they're going to take up. So I'm going to say column left is flex 1. And I'm going to set its background color to black. So you can see that's actually filling the whole of the page at the moment, but we're going to fix that in a second. And I'm also going to set this container to be displayed as flex. And I'm also going to say the flex direction is column, because we've got the two elements inside of there, which are going to be stacked on top of each other. Okay, and let's move on to column center. So for column center, I'm going to say it's going to take up 2 flex units on the page. Again, the display of this will be flex, and the flex direction will be column. And now you can see the page is starting to look a bit more like it should, but we'll finish off with column 3, which is the right column. And again, this is going to take up 2 flex units. We'll set its display as flex and the flex direction as column. Okay, so that's our column setup, although you can't really distinguish between these two at the moment, but you can see definitely that our first column on the left is displaying here. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to work through each of these columns in turn. First of all, adding the markup inside of them, and then we'll come back and add the styles individually for them as we go along. So let's go back to index.html. And we're going to put some stuff inside of the menu block to start off with. So I'm going to put a heading level 1 tag in there, and I'm going to say plus and nest, which is the name of the template that we downloaded. And I will just go back and just change the color in here to white for the text color, just so you can see what we're doing as we're going along there. So you can see the headings appearing there now. And then the next thing we're going to have is an ordered list. And inside there is going to be several list items with anchor tags inside them. And we'll just stub those out with hashes for the moment. Oops. And then we're going to put in the text for each of them here. So homepage, our products is the next one, editorials, stockists, about us, and also contact. So this isn't looking great at the moment, but don't worry about that. We're going to come back and style it shortly. But that's pretty much all there is in the menu. If we look back at the design, you can see it's got the heading, and then it's just got these menu items in here. And once we've styled them, it should look a bit more like that. But in the footer, I'm actually going to break this down into 2 sections. So we'll have one div with a class of top and one with a class of bottom, just to represent each point. Because what I'm actually going to do is this section here where we've got next up, that will be one div inside of the bottom section of this first column, and then this image with the couple of icons in here, that will be another div. So this will be top and this will be bottom. So what have we got in the top section? Well, we've got a bit of text that just says next, and we've got an image, image tag there. And there is an image in our directory called next arrow right, which is the one that we want for that particular element there. I'm just going to remove the alt attributes in this tutorial here. And that's all we want in that first top div. But in bottom, we're going to add a background image, but there are also 2 images inside there as well. There's image chart.png, and there's another one which is plus.png. So we can see those elements are being put onto the page there now, but they're obviously not looking correct. So that's all the content for this particular column. So let's go and add some styling for column left now. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is target the top div that we had, which had a class of menu. So I want that to actually take up most of the column itself. So I'm going to set that to have a flex unit of 3. And just in comparison, we'll set the footer here now, and that will have a flex of 2. So you can see they're about proportionate to the design at the moment. And the next thing I'm going to do is add some padding. So we can use relative ems because we set the 14 pixels for the HTML tag at the top of our style sheet here. So I'm going to have 2 rems on the top and bottom and 4 on the left and right. And this might not look exactly right at the moment because our page is going to be a little bit squashed because I've still got the text editor open at the moment. But when we're finished, the padding should all line up nicely. And the next thing I'm going to target inside of the menu class is the H1 tag. So its color's already been set at a higher level, but I'm just going to remove any margin that's on around that H1 tag just to lift it up a little bit. And then the other thing we've got in the menu is the ordered list tag. So I've used an ordered list here because it actually gives us the number for each item in the menu, but it doesn't quite look as we want it to, and it is actually a bit tricky to target these marker pseudo elements. So I'm going to be removing those in a minute and recreating them using a different technique. But let's just add a bit of styling to this OL element. So 4 rems on the top and bottom and 0 on the left and right, and just remove any padding that's associated with it. So you should be able to see the items in the list are actually lining up quite nicely with the H1 tag. Let's target those list items themselves, or rather the anchor tag inside them. So the first thing I'm going to do is set the text decoration to none to remove the underline from those tags. And also I'm going to set the color as white. And that's quite bright, and if you look on the design, they're actually faded out a little bit. So the actual item text inside of here is a bit off-white. It is actually a white color, but it's got an opacity value on there, so it's that's why it's a bit faded out. So what we'll do actually is we'll just use a custom white color. So let's drop our RGB value down. Let's say about 192 should be good. If we save that, yeah, okay. So the list items are a little bit faded out now, which is what we're after. Okay, so we don't want to target anything else inside of the anchor tag itself at the moment. What we'll do is make the font size a little bit bigger, so 1.25 rem. And I'm going to set a bit of margin for each of those LI elements, so just to put some space between them, so they're spread out a bit more. And just a bit of padding on the top. And I'm just going to set the position to relative, and the reason I'm doing that is because I want to target the before selector for this, and I'm actually going to set that position for that element to absolute, and I'm going to use this to actually put the number above the item in the list, because if you look at the original design, you can see we've got all of the menu items, and then the actual number of the item in the list is actually above the item description itself. So I'm going to come back to that in just a second, but just to show you what I mean, I'm going to remove the marker pseudo element, which is basically the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 that we've got here now. And it is a bit tricky to remove this, so I'm going to set its font size to 0 and it should just disappear. Usual techniques like display none doesn't seem to work for markers, but this seemed to be a good solution that I found. Okay, so back to the before element, what we're going to do, I'm going to set another color on it, and let's just start off with white, but I will drop it down so it's a bit faded out again. Maybe a little bit more than the actual element above it itself, so maybe even a bit darker than that. So something like 122. See what that looks like in a second. And what I'm going to do is set the content equal to 0 and then counter. And let's add a top value of -20 pixels just so that we can actually see that. So this counter is a special feature in CSS that basically counts a number for us, and we can then use it in a string for our content as we have here. But you can see it's all 0, 0, 0 at the moment. So what we need to do in the LI elements as they progress, we just say counter increment, and the name of the counter I've just called is counter. We could call it menu counter, for example. That might make a bit more sense. And you can see now we get 0, 1, 0, 2, etc. all the way down to the bottom. So this is just a nice way of using CSS's built-in techniques to actually do the counting for us. It's unfortunate that you can't actually move and do much with the marker pseudo element because we could have just adopted that. But this is just a bit of a nice technique to know in order to get this done. So we're looking pretty much like the design. The only thing is we've got one element here which is actually looks like it's been selected, so it's been highlighted. So let's add an active class onto the li items. So right down here, we'll say if the li item has got a class of active, we'll set its color to be white, so the text color will be highlighted. Also, we'll target the before pseudo element as well and set that color to white. So this is the number itself. Let's go and add the active class onto one of these elements here. So I think it was on editorials on the original design. So if you save that, so you can see the text for the before element has been highlighted as white, but the element itself doesn't seem to have been made white. We'll probably need to target the anchor tag inside there. So if we just do that. Yeah, okay, so the text for editorials is now white. And the other thing as well is that it's got like a kind of underline here as well, like a little highlighted line to show you which one's been selected. So let's add that on there as well. So for that, I'm going to target the after pseudo element rather than adding a new one into our markup. And I'm going to say its width is 200%. Its position is absolute. Its height is 1 pixel. And we'll set the content property to an empty string so that it displays, and set its bottom property to 0 and left to 0. And we're just going to achieve the effect by putting a border on the bottom of the element. So it's 1 pixel, it's solid, and we'll just go with white. So that looks to be working pretty well. If we actually just go back to the center column just for a second, and if I just set its background color, just to green say, you can see that that white line's actually extending out of the first column, and we don't want it to do that. We want it to kind of stop as it hits the end of that column. So we can just, in the overall menu class itself, if we just set overflow to be hidden, there you go, it stops when it hits the end of the div. Okay, so let's get rid of that green color. So that's pretty much the menu done. If you compare it to the design, it looks fairly similar. We could maybe tweak the colors a little bit. But what we're going to do, actually one thing is the heading level 1 tag should be all in uppercase. So let's put a text transform in the property to be uppercase. It's just spilling out a bit there, so maybe we'll set the font size to 1.5 rems. Maybe go 1.75. And now that's looking pretty good. So we need to now work on the bottom column here. So we're going to go all the way down to the footer, which is the div that we set up here. And we created 2 more divs inside of there that had classes of top and bottom. So as mentioned, this will be the top section and this is the bottom section here. So let's do this top section first. We first of all want to get the color of this rectangle that we've got here. So let's just grab that hex value while we're in the design. So top, we're going to set the background color to be that hex value. And we're going to set the color of the text to black. And we also want to align those items a little bit as well. So we'll set this as a flex container and we'll say justify content is space around so that the elements aren't pushed right to the edges, and align items to be center. And just for a bit of completeness, that image that's in there, we'll just set the cursor of that to a pointer so that when you actually hover over, it looks like it's a link that you can click. And then let's move on to the bottom section here. So the first thing we want to do is set a background image, and that can be found in our images directory, and it's called next image. So let's set that. And we'll set the background size to cover, and we're going to set some padding as well, so 1 rem of padding, so those icons are pushed in a little bit. And again, for the images themselves, we'll just set the cursor to be pointer. So obviously this isn't appearing just as we'd like it to, so what we can do in the footer itself, we'll set this again to another flex container, just making sure that the flex container is set as a columns. And then let's give the top element a flex value of 1, and then the bottom flex value of 4. So that's appearing a bit more like the design that we had before. The only other thing we want to do is make sure these icons are at either end of the container. So let's set the bottom element as well as a flex container, and we'll say justify content is space between. Oop, too many E's. And the items are being stretched at the moment, so we'll say align items, it's flex start, which will just put these items right at the top of the containing footer element here. So let's compare that again to the design. I think it's looking pretty good. We've got most of the detail in there. Maybe that text could be a little bit bigger there. It just says next up. Change that there, and then in the top element, we'll just set the font size to 1.5 rems. That's a bit more like it. And now we're going to start moving on to the center column. So I'm just going to close down some of this in the column left, so that's hidden. And we can start working on the center column now. So what we should probably do first is go and add some markup into that section. And there's not a huge amount that we need, so let's go in and add that now. So in the heading section, the first thing we're going to want is a heading level 1 tag as well. Which is probably a heading level 2 because we've already used a H1 in our page already. So it says in there, plus, there's an ampersand sign, and nest, and we'll put a H3 directly underneath that, and it says a speaker and headphones in coexistence. Yeah, I guess it's something where they've got speakers and headphones in the same product, I guess is what they're trying to sell. And that's all we really need in the top section. But in the hero section, I'm going to put another element inside of here to contain the content that's going to be in it. And we'll have a H2, and it says the private side of music. And there's some actions in there as well. So the user can kind of either click this view button or the share button, presumably. So I'm going to add another div in for that, just so we can style it a bit easier. And there is some images for those. So in images, we've got i.png. And also, there's another one called share.png. Okay, so we've got the content in there, but it's just not looking as it should. So let's go ahead and style that. So the first thing we'll target in the col center is the H2 tag. And first thing I'm going to do is change the font family to make it bolder, or at least use the Gilroy extra bold that we imported earlier on. And if that's not available, we'll go with sans serif. And it was all uppercase, so we'll say text transform is uppercase. And just remove any margin that's on that heading level 2 tag. Okay, so that's nice and bold now, that's looking good. So the other thing we want to do, I actually put a span around the ampersand because we want to put it in this like outlined state. And there's a little technique that you can use for this. So first I'm going to target that span that's inside the H2 tag, and I'm going to set its color to white, which obviously makes it disappear on the page. But we can actually use a text shadow. So with the text shadow, we go all the way around. We'll say -1 pixel, 0, and then 1 pixel, -1 pixel and 0. And then we'll use the orange color that we had from the design before. And then we'll do the same thing again, the other way around. And then finally 1 pixel, 1 pixel. And the orange color again. So that gives us this outline around the ampersand, which looks quite effective. And the other thing I want to do is target this heading level 3 tag here as well. So let's target that here. And for the span that's inside that, that actually wraps the speaker and headphones text. So I'm just going to set the font family there to the same thing again. So Gilroy extra bold with a capital B. Okay, so this isn't in the right place. So what we're going to do inside of here is actually put some padding around it, and I've just noticed I haven't actually targeted the heading class that we created, so let's just wrap the H2 and H3 in that so that it doesn't affect the bits underneath as well. So we're going to set a flex property here of 2 because we're in a flex container again, and we're also going to set this as flex 2 so we can push the items around, and set the flex direction to column again. And what I'm going to do is say justify the content to flex end, which will put it at the bottom of this element, And also add some padding in here too, so 2 rems on the top and bottom, 6 on the left and right. And now if we go down and target the hero class that we had in here, so this is the extra content below that, we can set a flex property on that of 3. And if we set the background image to the hero that's in the images directory, start to see a bit more of what the design is supposed to look like. Let's set the background size here to cover. And we're also going to set these items in here as a flex container too. Once more, we'll do flex direction is column. And we're going to justify the content. Again to flex end, so it's at the bottom of this block. And we'll set some padding of 6 rems. And then inside of the hero element, we had the container class that we created. Which is going to set its width to 50% so it doesn't spill out too much. And if we target the H2 as well and set its color to white, and we're also going to make this text bold as well, so we'll use the Gilroy extra bold and sans serif if that doesn't exist. And the font size needs to be pretty big again, not as big as the title, but we'll go 3 rems. Maybe just for this design we'll go a little bit bigger here, so we'll say 60%, 70% of the width, maybe even 80%. And that's kind of what it looks like in the design. So the last thing we need to do is these action items down here, so we're just going to separate them off and make them the appropriate size and line them up. So let's target the actions div element. We'll use a flex container again. Justify the content to be space between. And also align items is center. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. The only thing I would say is this column here seems to be pretty similar to this column sized here. And if you look on the design, I guess you could say this one's slightly smaller, with the main central column being a bit bigger. So let's find our column center, and we'll just make it a flex spacing of 3. So I think that'll just make this right column a little bit smaller and this central column a bit more prominent. Okay, so I think that's the central column done there. So let's move on to the final column, which is this one on the right. Again, let's add some markup into there first. So we don't need much in the hero section up here, but you can see there's a couple of icons as well. So there's one here and then this section down here with some text. So we'll add some markup in for that. So again, I'm going to create another containing class called top. And there'll be an image in there, and it'll be the search icon. And that's the only thing that we need at the top level, but in the bottom level, we'll have another H2, and it says unified experience. And then for those arrows, I'll just give them a class of arrows in a div there, and there's 2 images. So there's image left arrow, and obviously another one after that, which is right arrow. So that's the content for the top section in the right column. Let's go into the footer. And there's a lot more going on here, but let's just break it down. So if we have a look, this is actually split into 2 more columns. So we need to set up 2 elements for these, which we'll target with flex as well. So first thing we'll do is we'll say there's a class of left. And inside of there, I'm just going to paste in the text that's you see on the design in a p tag, which is this text here. And then we'll have another div for the actions below that as well. So let's just create that with a class of actions. So there's 2 sections to that. There's the likes. So we'll say image, and then in our images folder, there's a like button. And there's a value to that as well. So I'll just put a span, and it can be 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever, however many likes the page has got. And the other one's another sharing tool. So I've just reused the same image that we had over here in the central column, but let's put that into a div. And then we've got image share.png. And again, another span. And that just has the text share inside it. Okay, so you can see we've got some content over here, but it's obviously still needs styling. But there's a bit more that we need to do. So we've got the content for this left-hand column, but we need some content for the right-hand column again. So we've got the left div there, and just after that, we'll create another one called right. And this has got another one of these heading level 2 tags in there with a span for the ampersand. So speaker and headphones. In the actual design it says designed by, but I'm going to be a bit cheeky here and say it's been coded by. So coded by. And I'm going to create another p tag that has a class of author, and you can feel free to put your name in there. Okay, so that's all the markup there. We've got a bit of styling to do on this final column, so let's head on over to the column right. Okay, so let's first work on this top section here, which was the Hero2 class. So let's target that. So we've got another background image for that. A URL image hero2.png. Well, actually, I think it's a JPEG for this one for some reason, but let's save that. And we'll set the background size to cover. And because we're in a flex container, we're going to assign that a value of flex3. You can see it's stretching out at the moment. And just to put it into context, we'll just target the footer class temporarily and just say flex2. That's appearing just as we'd expect it now. So this Hero2 class, we're going to set this as a flex container as well, because we want to align some of the content inside it. And we'll set the flex direction to column. And justify content, if we say space between, it'll actually just push the icon element that we've got at the top and the other content right to the top and bottom of the container. So for that top element, which has just the search icon in there, again, we can set display as flex and justify its content to flex end. So it's at the other end of the element now. And let's just set some padding of 2 rem. And I guess we should also put the cursor as pointer so that the user can actually hover over it and click it. So that's all we need for the top section, but for the bottom section, we'll say the display is flex and justify the content. Again, space between, but we're going to align the items vertically to the central position, and we'll match the same padding as we had in the top element as well, so that it pushes it in. Okay, and the only thing to target in there is the H2 tag, and we'll set that color of that text to white, and we'll make the font bold again, so font family is Gilroy extra bold, sans serif, and probably make the font a bit bigger as well, so font size is 2.5 rem. Which, if we go and check on the design, is pretty much what the original design looked like. Okay, so the last thing now is to work on these bottom 2 columns here. So we're inside of the footer class, and again we're going to set a display of flex. And so the left, we don't need to set it as a column this time because we're going to be using it side by side as a row. So the first thing is the left is going to have a flex property of 1. So now we've got our 2 columns there. And the background color of the left column is actually going to be black. Oh, background left, background color. And the actual color of the text is white. Oops, white. We're going to go with a padding setting of 2 rem. That should be okay. And also the text itself is quite squished up. So we'll update the line height property. Just to give it a bit more space in between each line. It's a bit more spread out there now, a bit easier to read. And then we're going to again set this as a flex container and set the flex direction to column and justify the content to space between. And you can see what that does is those actions at the bottom of the column are now pushed right down to the bottom there. So let's target the actions. And whilst we're here, we'll also grab likes and share. And they're all going to be flex containers as well. But the reason we're doing that is so that we can align items to be centered, so they're just vertically aligned. You can see they all line up nicely. And for likes, we're just going to put a bit of margin right on that. And also in terms of likes and the share element, the span inside that actually has the text, whether it's 1, 2, 3, 4 or share. So we'll just put a bit of margin on that. Margin left, 0.5 rem. So there's just a bit of spacing between the actual icon and the text itself. So let's go back to the design. That looks pretty good. It pretty much matches what we've got there. So the last thing then is to actually do this last column in the bottom right hand corner. Let's just close up left there and target the right class. So let's just set a flex value of 1 there, just so that those columns are equal. And we'll set a display of flex again, and the flex direction is going to be column. This time though, we're going to set the justify content to be central. So the columns will be centered in the div. And also we'll set the text align to be centered as well. So the text inside of the elements will actually be in the center of the element too. Okay, and let's target that H2. And we'll set the font size to 2.5 rem. 2.5 rem. Should be just about right. And then we'll set the font family to be bold as well. So Gilroy, extra bold, and sans serif. We'll do the same thing that we did in the central column as well and target the ampersand, which is inside of the span. And if we just go up into the column center where we did that text shadow, let's just copy that line and drop that into our span. Set the color as white as well. And what you'll notice on the design actually is the ampersand's actually on a separate line. So we can force that just by making this span element a block level element. So we'll just say display is block, and I'll force it onto a new line. That's looking pretty good. And the last thing we'll do is just target the paragraph tags, which is the coded by text at the bottom. So we'll remove any margin that's on them to bring them together. Set the font size to be a little bit bigger. And then there was also inside of there the author class as well. And we'll just make that bold by setting the font family. So I think that's pretty much our completed project. So we've taken the design and coded it up. Let's just make this full screen here. And let's compare it to the design. So I think we've got pretty much everything in there. We've got all of the columns. We're using the same font, and we've done some of the effects like they've done with the typography, like with the ampersand, for example. And we've also done a few things like managed to recreate this menu using a custom ordered list. And I think the width and the height of the columns pretty much matches what the original design was. So let's just have a look again. There may be a few things like some of these icons might be a bit too small, so we could always go back and make those a little bit larger. And one thing I think I will do is just this private side of music. I think we were playing around with the container size on that. You can see in the design it's bunched up onto the left hand side here, so let's go back to the code. And that was in the central column. And we set this container to 80%. Try 50% this time. Possibly even a little bit less as well, so 40% maybe. Okay, so yeah, that looks a little bit more like the design file that we had. So there we go, that's pretty much the end of this tutorial. Thanks very much for watching, and hopefully you've learned a few things about CSS and maybe some HTML as well. There's always little bits and pieces that you can always learn by doing these projects, and I encourage you to go ahead and get some designs and start coding them up yourself. And if you do go ahead and have a go at this project or any other projects, it'd be great to see your work, so drop a comment in the below with a link to your completed project. So that's it for this tutorial. Thanks very much for watching, and don't forget to subscribe to support the channel and so you don't miss out on any future tutorials.